But now it's my pleasure to introduce Helena Fraser, who's the head of the private sector section at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and who's been at OCHA, I think, for many years. And also Wasa Angelino, who is the partnership director for People, which she's going to tell us all about, a company developed to produce and distribute she will demonstrate, I think, the Pipu. So, Helena, could you help us sort of set the scene and the framework for the conversation with the panel, and tell us about OCHA's initiatives, some of the initiatives and projects that you're running forward with to engage more with the private sector?
Thank you very much. I'll tell you a little bit about why OCHA got involved in this close collaboration with HFP and ODI 2 years ago. And it was started off with our Undersecretary General Valerie Amos expressing great frustration after her second trip to Davos, with so many business leaders coming up to her and saying, everyone says to me that they want to help and they want to do something sustainable and engage, and yet they always say we ask the wrong questions and we aren't able to even articulate what they could possibly do in an effective and long-term way. And so she started pressing for a change inside OCHA, and that resulted in the creation of the team that I head, which is the private sector team. And our first job was to think through what OCHA, as the coordinating arm of the UN in emergencies, should be doing to try and catalyse more effective business engagement in emergencies. And so the first thing we did was said to ourselves, well, we need to have a research base to understand what the challenge is. And so we were thrilled to find two willing collaborators in the form of Randolph and Steve to lead the process of these 4 country studies and the final report, which we're launching today. And that really does, from OCHA's perspective, help set the stage for moving now to a practical and operational way forward. And we haven't been lagging behind and waiting for this all to happen. We have also been testing from a practical perspective what the UN could do differently and what OCHA specifically could do differently. So when Typhoon Haiyan hit last year, we did something that, frankly, it's amazing hasn't been done before, but it hasn't. We deployed a private sector liaison focal point, not to do private sector fundraising, in fact, not to even mention the word fundraising, but to do private sector liaison and engagement and to channel interest requests, offers to engage in a strategic way to the right parts of the humanitarian family, to field the hundreds of calls, and she literally fielded hundreds of calls, both from multinationals globally, but also the Filipino vibrant business community. And she found out, for example, that within days the Filipino business community had organized itself into clusters because the government had organized itself, as you all know, into clusters. But nobody had made the connection between the humanitarian clusters and the business clusters. And so the other thing she could do as a natural extension of OCHA's coordinating mandate was try to broker discussion between, for example, the engineering and reconstruction businesses that had formed into a shelter cluster and the people on the humanitarian side working in the equivalent. I'm not saying it was a perfect deployment, but we certainly learned a lot about what could be done differently. We also learned a lot about some of the missed opportunities. She reached out to the Chambers of Commerce, both the International Chambers of Commerce and the Filipino and regional district Chambers of Commerce. And one of the interesting feedbacks we had in Tacloban, for example, sorry, my microphone was skewed, was that there were real missed opportunities where potentially the UN and or the donor community could have lobbied for change that would have ensured a much more resilient rebounding of community livelihoods. And I'll give you 2 brief examples here. The warehouses had just been restocked, commercial warehouses had just been restocked before the typhoon hit, and they were severely looted afterwards. And when the business owners asked the local government and local authorities to help police them, they said, we don't have resources to do that. But this is the kind of thing that should be changed next time, because there is already a next time. There is a typhoon, in the Philippines now, and that is a clear example of again, if we're doing cash programs and there's nothing to buy because the warehouses are empty and the small medium enterprises in Tacloban area are not able to get back on their feet, and that's also compounded by a raft of other issues that hadn't been thought through and that we collectively as the humanitarian community could and should have thought through, like tax relief for small medium enterprises in affected areas. So that's one of the practical things we've tried to do, and we're now learning from the research and analysis that has gone on, also trying to see how we can take that to scale, and what needs to be done in other crises of that nature, and what OCHA's role could be, and how other humanitarian actors might accept or not accept that role, in order to smooth the path and provide a more enabling environment for businesses to engage. Because let's face it, in countries where there's a vibrant private sector, the businesses are often there before we are. They're responding before we are. Accenture had 30,000 employees in the Philippines. Just by keeping those in the affected areas on their payrolls, they were helping the humanitarian response hugely. And it goes on. I could keep listing more and more examples, but we are not thinking these things through on the humanitarian side. We're working too often in a stovepipe, and the research completely confirms that. I'll give you another example of how we're trying to move. Yes, very quickly. Move to a more practical stage. The Global Compact, I hope you're all aware of the UN Global Compact initiative for responsible business. There are now about 80 active Global Compact local networks around the world. They would like to collaborate to advance UN objectives. They are small, medium enterprises and sometimes multinationals. And yet, when I sat with a bunch of them in an annual meeting 3 weeks ago in Addis Ababa, they said, we are never asked at the planning stage, at the analysis stage by the UN and the humanitarians to sit together and define what the livelihoods challenge in Darfur is. This was from the Sudan Global Compact. Or what the nutrition challenge in Khartoum area is. And yet we have commercial interests that could actually align very closely with these humanitarian interests. And we think that we could do a lot more to help achieve UN objectives if you bring us in earlier. So to wrap up, OCHA is also leading a series of regional business consultations as part of the way to input to the World Humanitarian Summit, and that will specifically take forward the recommendations coming out of this report. And we really hope over the next 2 years before the World Humanitarian Summit to achieve some real tangible changes to ensure that some of these recommendations are taken forward at the practical and operational level, building on our experience to date, so that there is a more enabling environment and that we can show that business and humanitarians can speak the same language, trust each other, and deliver together against shared objectives. Thank you.